Do big companies pose a problem to people in society? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's segment of the Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, President of Future Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that, as you know, brings you the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. And I'm joined as I am every week by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another week of Libertarian Angle.
And it's good to be here with you and our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, great to have you all with us. As I tell you every week, come and visit us at fff.org if you want the principled case for libertarianism. And also, of course, subscribe to this YouTube channel. All right, so Richard, I came across an article that talked about the fact that some of the big CEOs of the social media world, Bezos of Amazon and the head of Facebook and a couple others, were being hauled before Congress to justify their bigness and their so-called power. And I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to discuss some central elements in Austrian economics and generally free market economics. At the same time, I came across an article where the Congress is considering a $10 billion, I think, a loan or bailout, which probably amounts to the same thing, of the U.S. Postal Service. So that gives us an opportunity to discuss a related issue in economics, and specifically Austrian economics, of monopolies versus bigness and so forth. So let me throw out just a few thoughts, and then I'll get your economic perspective on what's going on here. Many years ago, when you and I both living in Dallas, and I was practicing law, and I had hired the head of the economics department at the University of Dallas, Sam Bostaff, to give me a tutorial in Austrian economics. He had agreed to do that, and we started with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. We went through it chapter by chapter. We went through David Ricardo's Principles, some of the other works by the classical economists. We worked our way up to Menger. And when we got to Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, that was when you came into the department, and he suggested that I go to you because he said there's nobody who knows more about Austrian economics in your age group than Richard Ebeling. And so you and I struck that deal. And I mean, I absolutely loved Human Action, and I loved our sessions. Human Action, to me, by Mises, I mean, there was some complex parts of it and parts that were just way over my head. But there were other parts that were just so clear and succinct. And one of those was the free market and what a genuine free market is all about. It's not the kind of system that we live under today, which is really a managed, controlled, regulated market under the rubric of free markets. That a genuine free market is one that is totally free of any government control or regulation. I mean, that's what was so revolutionary about Adam Smith's concept in his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. I mean, throughout history, governments have regulated or managed, controlled economic activity. You go back to the age of mercantilism, the Middle Ages. Throughout history, there's just this mindset that if government doesn't manage economic activity, there'll be chaos. The poor will be dying in the streets. The elderly will be dying of illness and infections and so forth. And people will be price gouging, and there'll be massive disparities of income and profiteering and speculation and so forth. In other words, it'd be a really bad situation. So, along comes Adam Smith, that was later amplified by the classical economists and then especially by the Austrians, and really, I think, culminates in Mises' magnum opus, where he says, a society is actually better off. I mean, if you want higher standards of living, you want prosperity, you want to help the poor, then you have a genuine free market system, which means a system that is entirely free of government control, management, and regulation. Now, this is a shocking notion. I mean, when you've got centuries of government control and somebody comes along and says, hey, let's just end it entirely and let's just separate economy and the state, it's a shocking notion. And one of the shocking parts of it for many people is that, oh my gosh, companies will get big and huge and strong and powerful, and they'll oppress people. But as Mises explains in Human Action, it's the exact opposite that happens. That in a genuine free market, the only way to get big is by satisfying consumers. And so he has this great section on consumer sovereignty, that in a free market, the consumer is sovereign, not the government, the consumer. He decides which businesses are going to get big by his buying habits. And so the businesses or the entrepreneurs that are providing customers and consumers with goods and services that they want to buy, that they feel that they need, that they'd like to have, they're the successful ones. They are the ones that are making the money. They're the ones that are making the sales. And if they fail to do that, they start losing market share and possibly even go out of business. And so rather than have government sovereign over economic activity, Mises and, of course, the free market economists say, leave the consumers free to make these decisions. And, of course, that means sometimes that companies that are perceived as powerful, like if you go back to 1970 and you look at the top 100 businesses in the country, where are those businesses today? I'd venture to say that very few of them, if any of them, are in the top 20 today. That's because they did not continue to satisfy consumers. Consumers are a fickle bunch. I remember Mises saying, the housewife, she's brutal, that she has no loyalty. She finds a better product at a lower price, and man, she shifts. And I think that's the way it is with most consumers. They want better products, better services at lower prices, and they decide who stays in business. So this notion that government needs to control Amazon or control Facebook is just absolute nonsense. To the extent that these companies are not benefiting through some kind of government regulation or government largesse. If they are, you end at that. You don't go and do what the U.S. government did to U.S. Steel some decades ago, breaking it all up and dividing it into several different entities and so forth. Let the market make that determination. What do you think?
Well, let's sort of understand some of the history of these things along the lines you've been suggesting. A number of people have made comparison studies of looking at the old issues of Fortune magazine that, in fact, since the 1920s and 30s, has had these annual issue of the Fortune 500, the 500 largest companies, the 500 wealthiest people. And in these comparison studies that people have done, look who were among the Fortune 500 in 1937, in 1948, in 1955, in 1964, in 1977, et cetera, et cetera. And what you see is that in many cases, those that were among the Fortune 500, let's say in the 1940s or 1950s, are not even there anymore. Some companies that were at the top of the list that are still among the Fortune 500 have moved radically down. Some that were low have gone up, and some that did not exist. In fact, a large majority of those that did not exist earlier because they just hadn't been founded or they were just beginning in those earlier decades have risen to the top. So the fact that what this points out is that to the extent that the government doesn't intervene in the market, prohibit competition, restrict competition, place barriers and tax burdens in the way of competition and so on, there is a natural dynamism that results in competition effectively operating to create the incentives and the profit opportunity and the open market for people who are having these entrepreneurial visions of something new, something better, something improved, something less expensive, are able to enter the arena of exchange, put their own savings or the borrowed savings of others under contractual arrangements of paying it back eventually, obviously, and purchasing the resources, the raw materials, the labor services, the capital equipment. And based upon this entrepreneurial vision, directing and organizing them to bring to the market some product that they think consumers would be willing to pay for. They are the ones who are facing uncertainty and bearing the risks. And as long as the market is open, it creates an arena, an area of the society in which those who have visionary ideas are willing to take risks, have an idea of something that they could do, or would just want to break out and be a self-employing individual in this fashion, owning their own company. As long as the road is open, if you will, what you see is these dynamic turning over. In fact, another Austrian-born economist, Joseph A. Schumpeter, born in 1883, he died in 1950. He studied at the University of Vienna with the older school of the older members of the Austrian school, Eugen von Bamberg, Friedrich von Wieser, for instance. He knew the founder of the school, Hornberger. What Schumpeter, in his writings, particularly his theory of economic development and his famous book from the World War II period, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, is to point out that the competition that matters is the competition that is seen across time, that gives people a chance to try things that may not come to fruition until years later. He referred to the market as a process of creative destruction. It's destructive because the new entrepreneur supersedes an old enterpriser on the market who cannot match the new enterprise's ideas or methods or costs. But it's creative because the existing is replaced not by only something new, but that is better, as I said, in quality, in features, characteristics, prices, availabilities. And this is the dynamism that makes our economy what it is. To give one example, when these people of a number of these social media enterprises were brought before Congress recently, Bezos of Amazon and Zuckerberg of Facebook and so on, what were the means by which people basically communicated a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago? How did people communicate? Well, you had a telephone, and it wasn't a smartphone yet. Okay, you had a computer, but it was a clunky device in comparison to anything we take for granted today. And how did you get news? You bought a newspaper. You bought a magazine. 30 years ago, these were virtually not even available on the internet yet. And you had to wait for a new edition of a magazine or a new edition of a newspaper to show up to get the latest reports of ongoing events. Or you had to turn on the television and wait for the 6 o'clock CBS News with Walter Cronkite. That's the way it is. December 7th, 1964. Okay, those of you old enough to remember Walter Cronkite. Anyway, Walter Cronkite. But that's how you found out things. What have these enterprises revolutionized? The way we communicate, the way we get information, the way we get consumer goods. You don't have to wait for the United States Post Office to bring you a package. You now have Amazon delivering. You have UPS delivering. You have FedEx delivering. And now it's overnight. It's overnight. And the internet, the social media, makes everything going on in almost every corner of the world instantaneously available for anyone who is interested to know something going on or has something to share. Think of our means of communicating with each other, Jacob. What are we doing now right here? This did not exist 30 years ago for us to do this type of recording. I would like to think billions around the world, but whatever number watches our YouTubes, Jacob. This didn't exist. This was impossible. This is what these entrepreneurs have done. Now, there are criticisms, for example, about does Facebook censor? Is it sort of like, does Google sort of suppress searches for certain people of certain political views? In the long run, that does not matter as much as leaving the field open. Because once the field is open, there's always the chance for someone to devise a new social media platform, a new way of instantaneously sharing information, who will say, you know, these people are showing their personal biases in the management of their own private company, as is a person's right on with their private property. I see an opportunity to be more open, more available to views that some people feel they can't as easily and openly express. And suddenly the entrepreneurs arrive. I would just say a couple of historical examples. 100 years ago, how did people get around? Trains. And there was the beginning of the auto industry. But basically, autos. Oh, the railway companies, they have these tight-knit controls over passenger traffic, over cargo shipments. Oh, surely it's a dangerous monopoly in the hands of a few greedy railway monopoly capitalists. Fast forward as the decades of the 20th century went by. How do you get around? Increasingly automobiles, more comfortable, safer, easier to handle on the road. How do you get around? Airplanes. How many of us even think of passenger rides on a railway anymore? Virtually none of us. We have been getting around by automobiles and by airlines. That's the dynamism of capitalism. The same way again, 40 years ago, how did you watch television? CBS, NBC, and ABC. Those are your three networks. By getting it through the antenna on the roof through the air. Now we have hundreds of channels from a variety of carriers and suppliers of these services. In fact, traditional television is likely to die and pass away in the existing era and growth of streaming. That's the dynamism of capitalism. Open fields, wide corridors of opportunity, freedom of people to try their ideas and to keep the profits they've earned as the motives and the incentives. As long as we do this, everything else is just government getting in the way.
Yeah, you make some really good points. I want to amplify your point about Amazon. I mean, it really is an incredible company when you look at it in terms of consumer satisfaction. That it started out, as most people can remember, with just selling books. Mm-hmm. And I remember how impressed I was with the efficiency of this book operation. You'll recall that one of the favorite book sources for libertarians back in the 70s, the 80s, was laissez-faire books. I mean, if you were a libertarian, you got your books through laissez-faire books. And they had this great catalog. This is before the internet, of course. Great catalog that they would send out monthly, and it had articles in it and reviews, and of course all the libertarian books it was libertarian heaven as far as I was concerned. And I couldn't wait every month to get my laissez-faire catalog. Then the internet comes along, and laissez-faire attempts to go online and sell books, and they put all their books online, but they were competing against Amazon. And it was fascinating because as loyal as I was to laissez-faire books, I mean, I loved them. When I wanted a book, I finally started going to Amazon because they were so much quicker, so much more efficient. You'd get your book almost immediately. And with laissez-faire books, it wasn't that way. And it wasn't, I don't know how long it took, but finally laissez-faire, I think they went out of business. They might still be operating, I'm not sure. But for all practical purposes, Amazon took over the book selling business. And it wasn't a surprise to me to see them, put Borders books out of business, which I lamented because I loved going into Borders bookstores. But it's good that Barnes & Noble was able to adapt. But I mean, then look what happened with Amazon. They started diversifying into everything. I mean, even groceries now. You can get your groceries, and it is a phenomenal company. And what it's done to raise people's standard of living is absolutely incredible. Has it caused, as you called it, economic destructionism, as Schumpeter put it? Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have gone out of business, unable to compete. But that's the price of progress, of higher standards of living. Now, if Amazon hadn't done that, they would have started going out of business themselves, or at least losing market share. The fact is that Amazon has continued to make its business model even better and better as each year goes by. Let me give you an example of what you were talking about this creative destructionism and the inability to satisfy consumers. You'll recall there was a time in the movie business, the home movie business, where Blockbuster was the leading company. I mean, there was just no way that anybody was going to be able to do anything, touch Blockbuster, even Netflix, that Blockbuster was so efficient. Yeah, I could go like just a 2-minute drive and I could go into Blockbuster and buy any DVD practically I wanted. It was incredible. Or you could order them and get them within a couple of days, the DVDs. It's phenomenal. And so, it was just impossible to imagine that anybody could beat this phenomenal model. And yet then all of a sudden the live streaming starts coming in and Blockbuster couldn't adapt. And so Netflix did. Netflix starts producing its own movies and originals, and it starts bringing imports from foreign countries, and it's incredible. So Netflix was able to adapt and has become this huge company satisfying consumers, and that's how it got big, by satisfying consumers. Blockbuster, which the statists would have said was a monopoly, had this omnipotent power over the home movie industry and so forth, is nowhere to be found. They're gone. So it's just an example of the dynamism of the market. And I'm not suggesting that you don't have a regulated market here in the country, but you can catch glimpses of how a genuine free market works by looking at these kind of sectors.
Yeah, another instance of this, which you were alluding to at the beginning, saying the articles you had recently read, and ties into this, is the United States Postal Service. Now, the United States Postal Service has been around since the founding of the country. It even says in the Constitution, delivering the mail. But the thing is that this has been a monopoly. The U.S. Postal Service has had this monopoly on the delivery of first-class mail, when in fact, if that monopoly was taken away, U.S. Postal Service would be even more dead than it is. What happened is that certain companies realized that they could get around that narrow definition of mail carrying. So you had UPS and then FedEx, who have been carrying everything except the old-fashioned traditional first-class mail. So basically, the U.S. Postal Service has been driven out of business if it wasn't for the fact that who keeps the U.S. Postal Service in business? The United States government. They have been running deficits for years, and they keep jacking up these prices for a first-class stamp. They constantly get infusions of money from the federal government because they can't match the competitive edge and creativity and time efficiency that these others do. And in fact, the U.S. Postal Service should be allowed to die, because in the world of these alternative carriers of packages and postages, and now, I mean, who even writes letters anymore? I mean, you and I communicate by text message or email, or we just give ourselves a call with our smartphones, and we can even FaceTime, right? If both of you have iPhones. We don't even do this anymore. Think of it. If the U.S. Postal Service had been able to keep an absolute monopoly on communications and had been able to ban text messaging and emails, which are forms of written exchanges of ideas like old-fashioned letters, we would still be writing a letter, putting it in an envelope and putting a stamp on it, dropping it in a box, waiting for the postman to pick it up out of the box, take it to the sorting center, sort it out, send it by truck or plane to some other postal sorting center to be sent to a local station where a postman would then have to deliver it to us. And we would be waiting days, depending upon the locations, weeks, as we used to get a letter from someone, and then the reverse, to give them a reply. We get irritated if we send somebody an email or a text message and they don't reply within 2 minutes, as opposed to waiting days or weeks. That is the dynamism of market openness and creative competition. That is why it is disastrous when you not only have a government that subsidizes a dinosaur means of communication, U.S. Postal Service, but can threaten or puts stumbling blocks and barriers in the way of allowing all of these multitudes of new and creative ways of communicating that we now have and entertaining ourselves and so on, put barriers in them, or to try to regulate and control them, how they run their businesses, what they run their businesses for, or to threaten their profitability.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Postal Service because you hit the nail on the head. I mean, if you go back to like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, Smith talks about monopolies in there, but he's not talking about big companies that have become big by satisfying consumers. He's talking about companies that are protected from competition through a grant of a monopoly by the government. The government says, you have the exclusive prerogative of providing this service. Like, let's say in Old England, playing cards, people played whist and so forth. That a monopoly would be, we're going to grant this company, and it could be a government entity or a private company, with the exclusive power right to produce playing cards, and no one else can compete. That's the monopoly that Smith complained about in Middle Ages and age of mercantilism and so forth, because people were always abusive in these companies. They knew they didn't have to worry about competition. They knew they didn't have to worry about satisfying the consumers. Where's the consumer going to go? And that's the way the Postal Service is. Now, some clerks in the Postal Service are very nice and they're very pleasant, but there's no question that the demeanor, the attitude of a government bureaucrat is just different from a private sector person. I mean, you can compare the TSA agent at the airport to an agent at the American Airlines desk. I mean, it's just night and day. You can see the difference in the demeanor. And the Postal Service, you can see that when you do business with them as compared to FedEx. And in the early days of FedEx, the Postal Service tried to get them shut down. And FedEx argued that they were not delivering first-class mail, that some other verbiage they used, and they were able to stay in business. But as you point out, that if anybody tries to deliver first-class mail, they will shut them down. And the way they do it, and it's happened before. I remember reading about some kids, like teenagers, that put together a first-class mail delivery service in a big city. And they were delivering everybody's first-class mail at a fraction of the price that a first-class postage stamp is. And everybody loved the service. It was efficient. It was fast. And the Postal Service got the Justice Department to go into federal court, get an injunction, immediate restraining order, prohibiting these kids from delivering first-class mail. And that's the power of a monopoly, and that you can go into federal court and you can get competitors shut down. Now, what kind of business model depends on that kind of thing to stay in business? I mean, if you're good at what you do, you don't need the government to stop competitors. You say, hey, let any kind of competitors, Bezos at Amazon, he's not over there lobbying for the government to give him a monopoly on the sale of goods or books or services or whatever. He's just out there competing. And so that's the difference. And ironically, many of the people, I call them statists, that complain about bigness in the private sector, they love the Postal Service. They don't have any problem with it, which is a government monopoly as compared to in the private sector where people are getting big by satisfying consumers.
Yeah, just to emphasize, it's not bigness that is ever a problem on the free market. How does any company become large in terms of gross revenues, market share? It has to do with its ability to deliver a product to the consumers that they find to be either better or less expensive or a combination of the two. Not a dollar goes into the coffers of even the largest of companies on a competitive market that has not been the result of some consumer making a voluntary choice to enter into an exchange because they valued more highly what the seller was offering them than the price that was being asked to purchase it. So all the billions of dollars that pass through Amazon and Google and all these other and Facebook are there only because either the customers or the advertisers have chosen to enter into a voluntary exchange because they value the services that the seller is giving them. And the cumulative amount just adds up to those large sums of money. But every dollar of it, every penny of it has been through a voluntary exchange. Now we look at Amazon, Amazon and Facebook and say these giant companies. How can anyone compete against them? Well, nobody could imagine how someone would compete against the railways. Nobody imagined how people would compete against the television corporations. No one imagined how the telephone company could be competed against. Now, I'm old enough, and back right here, you're old enough.
Hey, speak for yourself.
There's a thing called a telephone, and it sat on your desk or your table, and you picked it up, and it had a cord attached to the base, and you would dial. And if you're really old enough, there'd be a voice at the other end that said, "Number, please, number, please." Well, I'm not that old, so just watch it. But I do remember the rotary dial. And, as far as AT&T was concerned, that had basically a government monopoly. To use the phrase from the old musical Oklahoma, by golly, they've gone about as far as they can go. That's it. It's sitting on the table. And then AT&T said, well, even we know how to improve a product. You don't have to dial anymore. You have buttons. By golly, now they really gone about as far as they can go. But then in the late 70s, early 80s, they basically ended this AT&T monopoly. What occurred within years, as soon as you allowed the market to arise and emerge and enter? Well, there was the Mickey Mouse phone, cordless with a long antenna. You talked into Mickey's belly button and you listened through his ear, and the Garfield phone. And then, though it's now politically incorrect, for the delicate feminine hand, there was the Princess Streamline phone with the long antenna. And got smaller, got more. And then you had the flip phones. Wow, by golly, I got a flip phone. And it even has a feature. You can do basic arithmetic. You can add and subtract. Really, they've gone about as far as they can go. But then, and it's hard to believe that it's only a little over a decade, some guy named Steve Jobs decides to come up with an Apple phone, a smartphone that now is our phone, our mediums of written communication, our movies, our radios, our everything. Once you keep government out of the way, the new is possible, because no matter how large you are for having satisfied consumers in the past, does not mean that you can hold their attention and receive their dollar exchanges if you don't keep doing better in your products than the new Jones next door.
Yeah, no, great point. And let me just make one final point here that I think needs to be made, is that this whole preoccupation with disparities of income. As long as people are making their money in the marketplace, there's no problem with disparities of income. I mean, if Bill Gates is making a lot of money or Bezos is making a lot of money, it's because they've satisfied consumers. And consumers have willingly parted with their money in exchange for what they're getting. But the exchange for what the thing they're getting is improving their standard of living. I mean, that's the whole idea of trade, that you give up something you value less, your money, that quantity of money, you're getting something you value more. So what these people have done, who are tremendously wealthy, is they've raised everybody's standard of living in the process. So there's no point in envying them or coveting their goods or stealing their goods or having the government take their money from them to equalize wealth and so forth. The market rewards people for satisfying consumers, and in the process of doing that is uplifting consumers at the same time.
Absolutely. Freedom works.
Yeah. All right. And is based on moral principles. So that's it. That's Libertarian Angle for this week. And thank you all again for tuning in. We just posted our mid-year fundraising letter on our website. We've also mailed it out. I'm going to be doing a video message to y'all. We could sure use your support here at mid-year. We're going through some tough times here in this economy and the corona crisis and economic conditions, and we fully realize that. But these are also the times when the voices of liberty are more important than ever. I mean, we're living in some brutal times here when it comes to liberty. We know that. I mean, 30 years ago when I started FFF, it was hard to imagine that things could have gotten significantly worse, but they have, decade after decade. There's no doubt about it. But these are the times, as Tom Paine says, the trimen souls, and this is the time for the real advocates of liberty to rise to the top and rise to the surface and battle harder. As Paine said in that quote, if freedom were easy, it wouldn't be valued. The fact is that freedom is not easy, and the way we achieve it is by steadfastly maintaining our principles. And for 30 years, y'all have helped us do that, and we're very, very grateful. We need your continued help as generously as you can. If you can make a recurring monthly donation, that would be ideal. That helps us plan for the rest of the year. So thanks so much for that support. And Richard, I enjoyed the conversation and look forward to seeing you next week.
Until next time.